Hello everyone, it's me, Crow, only on Vilebranch, found at titansleague.org, and I'm here with you guys today to show you the Mage overview. Possibly one of the more in-depth revamps, overhauls, whatever have you, of the class, especially for level 19. Let's get right into it. Alright, so first starting out, we're going to check out the base abilities. You have Arcane Blast, Blink, Presence of Mind, Mage Armor, which is 20% of your mana regeneration while casting, and 5 resistances. You also have access to Evocation, Counterspell. Mana Shield might be a level 20 ability, I think. I'm not sure. Blast Wave is also a baseline ability, as is Frostfire Bolt and Molten Armor. You also have access to Fire Ward and Frost Ward. Got Cone of Cold, and I believe that's it for the abilities that are not normally accessed at level 19. Everything else is basically the same. You got Arcane Missiles, Explosions, etc. Amp and Damp Magic. I think that's mostly the same. Alright, let's get right into the talents then. So here in the Arcane tree was a bit more interesting, because we have Precision, which will reduce the mana cost of Frost and Fire spells by up to 9%, and increases the chance to hit with Frost and Fire by up to 6%. And this is for this little spear here, which will return your spell criticals mana costs if they are Frost or Fire. There's a theme here, because finally, Evoker is a it's a good passive that causes your Frost spells to invoke Flame, increasing the critical strike chance of your next Fire spell by 15%. Evoking Fire will evoke Cold, which increases the critical strike chance of your next Frost spell by 15%. And Evoke Ether is casting an arcane spell, grants either the next Frost or Fire spell to critically strike 10% more often. So the theme here is to alternate your spell schools into using kind of an elementalist type build. And each time you consume an evoke effect, you get a 2% stacking spell haste buff that stacks up to 10 times for a maximum of 20% spell haste, lasting 15 seconds. So, with a short duration, it means it'll only last during the fight. However, you can consistently throw it up by evoking Fire, Cold, throw some arcane spells like Arcane Missiles in there, in between your attacks, and you will ideally have support for an elemental build, so that you can double dip into Frost and Fire. Maybe get a bunch of critical strike stuff that synergizes with critical strikes like Ignite, or Ice Shards for the critical strike damage, especially if you plan on using your Frostfire Bolt a whole bunch. Because I found this particular spell has a lot of fun stuff that you can do, like dealing a bunch of extra damage, and also having that burn over time. It's really cool, I highly recommend it, but it's only one of like 4 or 5 ways to play. So moving on, we are at over here, Arcane Instability. This is going to be a deep Arcane overview, real quick. This will reduce the pushback from your arcane missiles and arcane blast by up to 100% at 3 points, and increase your arcane hit chance of up to 6% in a similar way that precision would. You also have arcane subtlety, which reduces the chance your helpful spells and damage over time effects will be dispelled by up to 30%, that's about 1 in 3 chance, and reduces the threat caused by your arcane spells by up to 50%. This is fantastic for when you do an AoE pull and you want to use your arcane explosions to really rack up that AoE damage. Next, we have Commit to Memory. When interrupted or silenced, you have a 50 or 100% chance at rank 2 chance to become immune to the next interrupt or silence mechanic last 20 seconds. This is basically the same as that one paladin talent I talked about over in the Holy Tree a few videos ago. And what this will do is if you're interrupted or silenced, it gives you a buff that absorbs the next incoming one after that for 20 seconds. What the idea here is to prevent you from being able to be interrupted or silenced twice in a row. This is a good way to break blanket interrupts, basically, to allow you to keep casting in between CC burst windows. This allows you to not just be blown down immediately. If someone silences you for 5 seconds, and the buff lasts 20, that means after the 5 seconds has occurred, you have a 15-second window that you can't be interrupted or silenced. Now, if they choose to blow a third interrupt or silence, then you're pretty much shut out of luck. But this is to help break that up or force your enemies to expend more resources in order to keep you crowd controlled only for interrupts and silences. You have Arcane Shielding. This will decrease the mana cost of your mana shield while it's active by up to 50%. And what that means is that when you use Mana Shield, it goes from draining 1.5 mana per damage to 75% of it, 0.75. So you're burning less mana than damage points. This helps you keep your mana pool up and still absorbs a bit of damage for 24 mana, plus the cost. This is to help you mitigate damage for yourself or others. As you might read on here, it says, it also increases the effectiveness of your Amplify magic or Dampen magic by up to 150%. Now what that looks like is over here, you only have a 10 damage mitigation with Dampen magic right now, and Amplify can increase by 15. Now what that means is at, let's see, an extra 150%. I think that's like 30, 35, almost 40 for Amplify magic, which, is a pretty significant amount. It's like having extra 40 spell healing on you. However, incoming spell damage is equally proportional. It will help the enemy blow you up too. So that, despite it kind of sounding like it's really powerful, is actually not all that powerful, because if you use it, it's a double-edged sword. Likewise, Dampen magic will mean that the incoming heals will be a lot less too, not just incoming spell damage. That said, it's kind of recommended if you want to play kind of this magic absorber build, this abjuration type spec that you kind of see in D&D on wizards, to help you absorb magical energy and disperse it. And in order to further support that fantasy, you'll also notice that this also affects the effectiveness of your Frost Ward, Fire Ward, Mana Shield, and Ice Barrier. The effectiveness of those spells is increased by 10 to 20%. On this server, your Ice Barrier and your Frost Ward and your Fire Ward are castable not just on yourself, but you can ward friendly targets. What this effectively means is that every 30 seconds, you can throw either a Frost or a Fire Absorb Shield on somebody and absorb more damage. Likewise, if you choose to be Frost and you put points into this to empower your Ice Barrier, it's a bunch more absorption. Ice Barrier can also be applied to a friendly ally target. This has a 1-minute duration with a 30-second cooldown, and it's 72 mana cost. So it's a little mana intensive, but you can play a mage fantasy in which you kind of support the party by throwing wards and barriers to protect your allies, and maybe debuff them with some frost stuff. Or some arcane stuff. Alright, let's keep going here. You guys already saw Master of Elements. This is to keep your Frost or Fire build up with a bunch of extra mana coming back from critical strikes. Magic Absorption is a fun one if you're playing that Abjuration build, because with this, you can also increase your resistances to up to about 20, and cause all the spells you fully resist to restore up to 6% of your total mana. This is a 1-second cooldown, no matter what rank you're at, but if you can resist a spell, this will keep a bunch of mana flowing back into you. Arcane Fortitude. It increases the resistances that your mage armor will give you, and it grants you armor equal to your intellect, which is great for mitigating physical damage. But the most important tooltip is the mage armor. As you can see here, increasing it by 100% makes it go from 5 magic resistance to 10. 10 plus 20 is 30. And that is a lot at level 19. Let's go over to our calculator. Over here, resistances, punch in 30. And looks like about 20, let's call it 24%. Let's call it 24% after punching it into the calculator of magic damage incoming will be mitigated through partial resistances, but also through some complete resistances, and that complete resistance will grant you mana. We also have Arcane Concentration. This just gives you a value over 10% chance to enter a clear casting state, giving you a 100% chance, or 100% of your mana cost discounted from a damaging spell right off the top. Every, 10% of the time, if you're using Arcane Missiles a whole bunch, this does count every time an Arcane Missile makes contact with an enemy. So 5 or 6 missiles. This will cause it to proc a lot more often. So if you're constantly using your Arcane Missiles in your rotation, expect to have a lot of mana discounts. This is intentional because Arcane spells usually cost a whole bunch of mana, and I didn't want it to affect the rotation too much. Evoker, Arcane Fortitude, we already went over that. Arcane Mind can increase your intellect by up to 15%. It does exactly what it says. It makes your mana pool bigger and gives you a higher spell crit chance. Epiphany. Likewise with the other classes, I have this philosophy where in order for crowd control to be really, really good, you have to dedicate some points putting into it, invest into it to make it work. Likewise, defensive cooldowns will be the same way. This reduces the cooldown of your blink and your counter spell by 20%. As you can see here, it's a 24-second cooldown and 25-second cooldown respectively. 20% off the top is like what? I want to say 5 seconds, making that a 20-second cooldown, and probably about the same, making like a 19 or 20-second cooldown as well. Just a little more powerful. It increases the duration of the counterspell interrupt by 100%, meaning instead of a 4-second base interrupt, this will go up to 8 seconds if you're an Arcane Mage, and give a 2 to 4 second silence as well. So you have your blanket silence, and after that, if you hit them while they're casting a spell, it'll be interrupted for another 4 seconds on top of that, as opposed to just a off chance of 4 seconds. Arcane Meditation will grant up to a 30% mana regeneration to continue while casting. If you use that on top of Arcane on the Mage Armor here, then you can get up to 50% of your total mana regeneration while casting. Of course, that requires you to use the Mage Armor instead of the Molten Armor, which gives you extra crit chance and reduces the chance of your crit, or Frost Armor, which is better for physical mitigation and slowing people down. probably use this a whole lot more in PvE. Next up, we got Mind Mastery. This does what it says it does. It gives you up to 20% of your total intellect as spell power, which increases the amount of damage your spells will do. We also have Arcane Instability, a 1-point passive talent. This is pretty cool because it just flatly gives you 5% spell crit, just right on the top of that. But it also causes your Arcane Blast spell to have basically a 1 in 3 chance to increase the critical strike chance of all of your arcane spells, arcane only, by 10%, lasting for 10 seconds. This is really, really useful because it gives you just that little extra oomph to critically strike, which will increase your damage flatly because that triggers a whole lot more often. I think if your base is about 5% spell crit, this bumps up to 10 with a 20% for arcane. It's really good while it's active. But it's only active for 10 seconds, meaning expect to be using it in a fight, but not very much outside of that. And there's some synergy with spell power, which will increase the critical strike damage bonus of all your spells by up to 50%. But it also increases the spell damage bonus of your arcane missiles and your arcane blast, making your spell damage, spell power, etc. a lot more impactful for those two spells specifically. You also got Arcane Flows. It reduces the cooldown of arcane power by up to 30%, and the cooldown of your evocation and presence of mind spells goes from 5 minutes to 4 to 3. Presence of mind's 5-minute cooldown here, so you can reduce to 3. Likewise, you reduce evocation to 3. This gives you access to some of your more offensive cooldowns, or utility rather, a lot more often. You also have Arcane Power, which increases the mana cost of your spells by 20%, but also increases the damage that they deal. This lasts for about 15 seconds, and with the extra cooldown reduction, you can get that down to almost a minute and a half, I think. Really, really useful to have this constantly going off to give you that extra damage / burst window. Without this, you still have some steady DPS, but it's not any greater than any of the other specs. Obviously, I balance the stuff to have about the same DPS no matter what spec you use. So the thing that makes you different from all the rest will be popping this offensive cooldown and having the extra burst window. I'll talk more about Arcane in a minute here. Let's finish with the talents. Arcane Barrage is kind of like how it normally is. You just blast some arcane damage at the enemy. However, unlike how it normally is, this requires your Arcane Instability passive to be active. But in order to reward you for that, this ability is not on the global cooldown. So when you use it, you can just blast it immediately in between your Arcane Blast / Arcane Missiles rotation that you have going on. Additionally, we have Aether Attunement, which will reduce the channel duration of your Arcane Missiles from 5 seconds down to 4, and at the second rank down to 3 seconds. It also causes it to go off a shorter time span, so you still have your 5 waves of missiles. They just go off in 3 seconds instead of 5 seconds, which will directly influence the amount of burst that you're doing. And if you put points into that, you get Divination. Peering into the arcane makes you more adept in it, increasing the number of waves from 5 to 6, and causing your party, your entire party, not just you, to regenerate 2% of your total mana pool every 10 seconds. This gives the Arcane Mage, unlike the other two specs, some group utility on top of what they offer. Speaking of group utility, their capstone talent down here is Hasten. Hasten doesn't cost you any mana and has a 1-minute cooldown, so it's kind of short. And what it does is that it rapidly speeds up time around a friendly target, increasing their melee, casting, or movement speed by up to 40%, but only for 7 seconds. The casting and movement speed effects don't stack with other talents and other effects, but this is still powerful in its own right. What you're effectively able to do as the Arcane Mage is to give a friendly target a bloodlust type effect for 7 seconds. This is really powerful and really useful for yourself on top of arcane power, or for more importantly, an ally. If they're having trouble standing in the fire, you can help them run away, especially in PvP if you use it on a flag carrier. However, this is also just great for your melee DPS, your caster DPS. Whoever's doing the most DPS, throw haste on top of them in a raid situation, and boom, boss gets clapped. A lot of good party utility here in Arcane. The party will love you. They want your aura to give you mana back. They want hasten. They want you to blow your cooldowns, do a bunch of damage. Arcane, I found, is kind of this very steady amount of damage that is very predictable, that kind of ramps up, blows its load, and then goes back down. And then you ramp it up again, and then blow your load again, and repeat. So you have this predictable spike kind of thing going on. Everybody knows what you're basically going to be doing. They know that you're going to come in here, you're going to do a little damage, it ranks up, racks up all the way, and then boom. And so that was kind of the philosophy I wanted Arcane to have. I also wanted Arcane to have a little bit of that utility spellcaster toolbox stuff. The ability to empower those types of things. And so, I feel like I properly did that. If you don't, or you do, comment below, like, subscribe. Do not forget to do that if you like what you see. And if you don't, tell me I'm an idiot. I love hearing it. Pretty receptive to that sort of thing. Alright, so some points here. Let's go ahead, gain some extra resistances. Fuck it. Give it a chance to give me some mana back. And I don't know. I'll theorycraft some extra stuff later. But basically, your arcane rotation looks like, where's Arcane Blast? Up here. Barrage, Blast, Missiles, we are power cooldown. Make yourself smarter. And hasten. Presence of mind. Polymorph is no shit button. And, okay. Now we got our armor on, so we're constantly able to cast. So this is what it will look like. You go, I'm casting Arcane Blast. Unlike Blizz-like stuff, the more you cast it, the faster it gets, on top of the effect that it normally does. You go 1, 2, gets faster, 3 is even faster, 4, fast as hell, blow your load. I got my instability up, so I'm going to cast that while casting Arcane Blast. And I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going, and going, and going, and then unload my missiles, and keep going. When I want my DPS spike, when I get my DPS spike, what I really want to do is wait. Because I neglected to mention your Arcane Missiles does not inherit any of your spell haste. So it stays as the 3-second channel time no matter what. Get that Arcane Blast off the extra damage. Oh yeah. That looks like it's doing good. 3, 2, 1, 0. Boom. As long as you time your arcane stability stuff correctly, you'll be able to throw out your arcane barrages predictably. And that's basically the build. As you can see, there's some spikes here, and so that'll look different sometimes. But the overall DPS is probably... I need this thing to actually fucking work with me. Current fight, damage. Let's try it out again. It looks like a lot. It's not that much. It should be anywhere from 80 to 90 DPS for every mage spec. That's kind of what I'm shooting for balance in general. Kind of feels like a lot, but it isn't, or should not be. When I start tuning the PvE content, it will be with that in mind. Looks like a lot. Then again, I'm not sure if my add-on's all fuckered up or not. That looks about right. Might need a little nerfing later down the line, but basically, that is the damage. Let's move on to fire. Now, fire is kind of similar to Arcane in that there's this thematic theme of building up power while the fight's occurring. However, it's more unstable. It's more reliant on your critical strike chance rather than balancing things. And so, leading into that, with that in mind, you capitalize on your crits with ignites. Here, molten shields will increase your fire resistance passively by up to 5 or 10%, or 5 or 10 resistances. This can also cause your fire or frost ward to have a 30% chance to reflect the warded spell while active. Additionally, your molten armor will have a 100% chance to affect ranged and spell attacks on top of melee attacks. So that little extra bit of fire damage that kind of licks out from your molten shields will be there. Let's see. What else? Critical mass will increase the critical strike chance of your fire spells by 6%, and the critical strike chance of Fire Blast, Scorch, Flame Strike, Blast Wave, and Dragon's Breath by an additional 6%. This is a great way to get extra crit chance right where you need it, because your fire crit chance is really, really important for your damage. You improve Fire Blast, because Fire Blast is a good part of your rotation, I think, or at least in PvP. PvE it might not be. Either way, it has a long cooldown, but you can discount by up to 10 seconds, putting it down to 6 seconds again? I think it's like 16 without it. So you put points into your Fire Blast here. Yeah, it's like 16. You put points into it to reduce it, so you can use it more reliably. Flamethrowing will increase the range of your fire spells except for Frostfire Bolt, up to 6 yards. Burning Soul reduces the pushback from damaging attacks while casting any fire spells by up to 100%. This also reduces the threat caused by fire spells by 40%, and increases the damage over time from your Fireball, Frostfire Bolt, and Pyroblast by 30%. This effectively means that this will increase the damage over time effects of your fire spells. It's kind of important, in my opinion, to take this if you want a more damage over time based build, especially if you stack it with Ignite. And Empowered Fire here will increase the damage of your Fireball, Frostfire Bolt, and Pyroblast by an amount equal to your spell power as well. That's also really good. Plus, every time your Ignite goes off, you have a 100% chance to regain 2% of your base mana. So this increases the potency of Fireball, of Frostfire Bolt, and Pyroblast. Also, it gives you mana back, which is something that I think fire is really, really necessary to keep your rotation going. I also like to use Precision here to reduce the cost of fire spells. And get Master of Elements here, because your spell criticals that you are focused around doing will return half their mana cost as well, allowing you to cast your fire spells quite a bit more often. Next is Pyroblast, which has a 1.5 second base cast time and a 6 second cooldown, and also is only usable on enemies that have 20% or less health. Pyroblast on a Vilebranch is an execute spell, meant to have a explosive finish, as it were. So, what else do we got here? We got Impact. This allows your damaging spells to have up to a 20% chance to cause the next Fire Blast that you cast to stun the target. Actually, I think it's 20% chance. But the stun's only 2 seconds, and diminishing returns would fuck that up a lot. Improved Scorch, really, really useful because you'll be scorching a whole bunch in between your spells here. Oh, that's another ability I forgot to go over. So you get that level 20. That's part of your base kit. Anyway, you can improve your Scorch by increasing the chance of your Scorch, Fireball, and Frost Firebolt to critically strike by 4%. And your damaging Scorch spells have up to a 100% chance to cause the target to be vulnerable to spell damage, increasing your spell critical strike chance against them by up to 5% on top of that. So, while you're using your Scorch a whole bunch, you'll have a high as hell chance of critically striking. I think it's 4 plus 6 here is like 10 plus 16 plus 5 could be like 21% on top of your base spell crit. I feel that's probably balanced because of how dependent it is for critical strikes to go off, for your damage to go off. And as you build more critical strike chance on your gear, it will increase the amount of damage you deal, but also really amp up the utility of like getting your mana back and such. Now down here, we have Firestorm. This reduces the cooldown of your Blast Wave, which is a base spell, keep that in mind, by 30 seconds. That's kind of how I justify it being a baseline spell here. Is now it's a 30-second cooldown, just like it normally is, only by investing into it, like I said earlier. Also, the cast time of your Flame Strike is now instant. However, this has a baseline 8-second cooldown, so you can't just spam it everywhere. However, it's still powerful and will still crank up your AoE DPS, which is why it's important, I think, to reduce the threat by getting your Burning Soul talent. But it's still pretty potent. Every 8 seconds you're here and you're able to throw it down, just wherever. Looks like it also causes impact too. Cool. Alright. The real important part of this is that it causes your Scorch to have a 100% chance to start a Firestorm. This reduces the cast time of your next Fireball spell by 0.8 seconds, lasting 6 seconds and stacking twice. So, this really blossoms because what you can do is go Scorch, Scorch, and if you do it within 6 seconds, you can make your third quotation mark Scorch actually a Fireball, which has quite a bit more damage than Scorch does, and has a bit of damage over time element to it as well. However, it is a break from your cranking up of the critical strike chance, so make sure you're still peppering the enemy with that. But throwing in a quick Fireball here and there too really helps with the DPS. Next you have Firestarter, which will teach you the ability Scorch. This version that's taught to you can be cast while moving, but the range is reduced by 5 yards. This is kind of a PvP modifier, so that people can't just move around and like spam it from a huge distance. If you want to be able to use the version while you're moving, you have to kind of get in a little bit closer to your enemies. And this allows them the ability to counterattack you, instead of just from a distance being able to run away and kite forever. Especially because a lot of their abilities will be up to 30 yards for their gap closers. So you have to kind of walk into the radius of those gap closers, which is why I feel like I'm able to justify being able to move while casting it. Also, we have Combustion. For 1 talent point, you can grab Combustion, which will increase the critical strike damage bonus of your spells by 50%. And for each of your non-spell crits, you gain a stack of Combustion, which will increase your critical strike chance by 5%, I believe. It might be 10. But basically, every time you don't crit, it will increase your crit chance until you crit 3 times in a row. Or not in a row. Until you critically strike 3 times. Then it goes away. This is a useful cooldown to help you critically strike, to force you to proc some of your stuff that you need to proc for your rotation. You also have Pyromaniac, which will increase your chance to critically hit by another 5% and allows you to generate half of your mana regeneration while casting. This is another great way to really make that fire flow and to keep your mana pool up. Next, we have Dragon's Breath. Targets in a 10-yard cone in front of you take about 100 damage and are disoriented for 5 seconds. If they receive damage, then they will break the disorient, and it will turn off your auto attack when used. So if you're wanting and you use this, you're not wanting anymore. I feel like this is an iconic ability since Burning Crusade, and so I felt the need to kind of include it. As you can see, it requires you to actually be up close and personal, about 10 yards away. This is a great move for PvP, especially because it kind of forces the mob off you, or the player off you. But in PvE, it also forces the mob off of you. So it also helps for your AoE damage rotation. You also have Fiery Finish. So here, your Fireball, Frost Firebolt, Scorch, and Fire Blast critical strikes have a 50% chance to allow you to use Pyroblast regardless of the target's actual health state. Pyroblast used this way does not trigger its cooldown either. What does that mean? This means if you critically strike, you have a half of that crit chance to proc your hot streak. So if I'm critting here 18% of the time plus like another 6%, let's call it 25%. This makes it to where 12.5% of the time you're able to throw out a quick Pyroblast without actually executing the target. This is both helpful in PvP, but also is helpful for your PvE rotation as well, because then you can kind of just burn enemies down even before the execution phase. So I personally like that. You have a couple more talent points here, so you get down to Draconic Rage. Here, your Scorch and your Fire Blast spells give you up to a 100% chance to trigger Draconic Rage. This will increase the damage, but also the range of your Dragon's Breath by 10%. This stacks 5 times and lasts for only 10 seconds. So this has to be part of your rotation if you want to start using it. You also have Burnout, which increases the spell critical strike damage bonus by up to 50%, but makes your spells a bit more expensive. And finally, you have Flame Burst. The Capstone Fire talent is a 45-second cooldown, instantly deals about 50 fire damage and stuns the target for 3 seconds. If the target is also affected by Ignite, it will burn the target for an additional damage equal to 20% of the damage per tick of the Ignite every 1 second for 10 seconds. Now, if you do the math real quick math, that's 200% of the damage over 10 seconds. That's 2 times the amount of your critical strike damage. Now, I will say the Ignite damage isn't 100% of the damage, right? It is only 24% of the spell's damage when you crit that target. Well, what this effectively does is adds another dot. That's 48% of that spell's damage on top of your Ignite. So, every 45 seconds, you can make that Ignite really, really hurt by basically making it where you almost cast 2 spells in a row. Now, let's do Draconic Rage real quick. 37. So that's like 47. Doing some quick math on my own here. There's no way I got an extra talent point. That's 41, right? Yeah, I guess I could skip out on this if I really want to. And put it into Evoker. But that means I have to throw like an Arcane spell in there. So let's make it an instant one. Be smart about this. Or maybe an instant Frost spell. Fuck it, right? I mean, this is definitely a variant of Fire you could do. So I go Scorch. As you can see, Draconic Rage is active. Remember how far away I had to be to hit it with let's cheat cooldown here. I'd be about this far to hit them with Dragonfire. This doesn't hit them, right? But with Scorch, let's get 2 stacks. That hits them right there, but not this one. But if I do it 3 times, this hits them. Something to note that a lot of people don't seem to know is that if you increase the range of a cone attack, it's not just the range outward that gets increased, but also the total cone. So if I turn a little this way, I hit everything over there because the range is increased. And because the cone is like right here, I can increase it out to here by increasing the range. So the more you know. So what can actually happen is you have a really big mob pack, or you can have a bunch of enemies on top of each other in like Warsong Gulch, and just right up on them and go, ha, boom, and hit like 5 people. It's really crazy. This Evoker version, I can critically strike and increase my spell haste a whole bunch, so that's kind of cool. Providing I do something like, hit with that. Looks like I got a fiery finish. Boom. I haven't actually used this, the Evoker with the fire spec yet, but I'm sure it'll be pretty good. Oh yeah, that looks pretty fucking great. Okay, let's start off cheat cooldown. But essentially, you put a point in the flame burst here, and you can throw out a lot of crazy damage really quickly. Draconic Rage allows you to have a giant fire breath for either CC purposes or to deal like what 150 fire damage to a lot of people. With a 20-second cooldown, that's going off quite often, especially with your pyroblasts going off. And so fire spec kind of feels like, I don't want to say it's the Scorch spec, but you are still using Scorch and Fire Blast a whole bunch of proc stuff. And then when they do, you can throw out a quick Fireball, which is kind of true to Fire Mage nature. You never really hardcast Fireball unless you like used your Dragon's Breath beforehand, right? So, but Scorch, you can pull out a few of those Fireballs actually when you have enough stacks, or if you get a stack of Fiery Finish, you can throw out your Pyroblast. And so what you're doing is you're kind of using this casino mage feel, where you're fishing for your procs, and when you get them, you want to use them a whole bunch in succession. And so instead of being a steady spike up and down, you have this unstable amount of spiking that keeps happening. That is unpredictable, but if you're tracking it, especially with like weak auras, then you are getting these windows where you can do a lot of bursts really quickly and then disappear. Frost is a bit of both in that regard. It's a little bit more stable, and the base damage isn't as high as fire damage is. But what you make up, or you lack in damage straight up. This does a little bit less damage, like 10 or 20% damage. But you make up for it in the utility, in the ability to slow people down, to control fights better, and I think you even have a little bit better AoE, to be honest. Although I think all 3 specs have really heavy, really useful AoE. So let's check this out. Frost Warding will increase the armor and resistance given to you by Frost Armor and Ice Armor by up to half. Additionally, this gives your Frost Ward and Fire Ward a 30% chance to negate the warded damage and restore mana to you. So this is really good for your warding, because this can give you mana back instead of just reflect it. Piercing Ice will just give you a flat damage increase for all your frost spells by up to 6%. And Shatter will increase the critical strike chance of all spells against frozen targets by up to 50%. This does include fire, so you can make it into your fire. And this does include Arcane, so you can include it in your Arcane specs. But you won't reliably hit it more often than being a Frost Mage. And so, for PvE, I'm thinking of like Dungeons and Raids right now. Permafrost. This increases the duration of your chill effects by up to 3 seconds, and reduces the target's speed by an additional 10%, and reduces the target's healing by up to 20%. Needless to say, Permafrost is your PvP slow/snare improvement. This is useful for controlling fights rather than actually doing a lot more damage to them. Ice Shards. This is a great one. This improves the critical strike damage of your frost spells by up to 100%, making them do a lot of the crit damage when they do crit. Arctic Reach. This will increase the range of your frost spells, basically, and the radius of your Frost Nova and Cone of Cold by 20%, which, instead of just range, will increase the radius, the outer part of your enemy's hit here. Frost Channeling. This reduces the mana cost of all your spells by up to 15% and reduces the threat that you cause, making you able to cast more throughout the fight. So this is really useful for PvE. Improved Cone of Cold increases the damage of Cone of Cold by up to 45% and reduces the cooldown by 12 seconds. I didn't show it earlier, but the base cooldown of Cone of Cold is 22 seconds. And when you put it into here, you can get it down to 10 seconds. So that's pretty useful for damage if you're using Cone of Cold for damage. I wouldn't, I guess, but if you are, then you're welcome to that spell, the talent here for the spell. Frostbite will give your chill effects a chance to freeze the target for 5 seconds. That's another crowd control effect. Ice Lance. This does some frost damage to an enemy and deals triple damage against a frozen enemy. So ideally, you use this against frozen enemies, right? Let's set the talents here to actually take those. Cool. Then you have Fingers of Frost, which gives your chill effects a 15% chance to grant you Fingers of Frost, which allows the next 2 spells to treat the target as if it was frozen, giving you the ability to increase your critical strike chance in order to deal a bunch of critical strike damage. You guys see what's going on there? Cool. Let's do this so we can freeze things more often. Hailstorm. Okay, actually let's start with Ice Barrier. Ice Barrier can be used on ally targets or yourself and will mitigate some damage. Also, while the shield holds, your spellcasting is not delayed by damage. And so this helps you keep casting spells without being pushed back. Hailstorm. Your Frostbolt and Frostfire Bolt stacks spells will give you a stack of hail. This stacks 5 times, and for each stack, you gain damage for your Ice Lance equal to 10% of your spell power per stack. It does say that's increasing your Ice Lance's damage only by 2 per stack right now, because that's displayed in the tooltip. This is because 10% of my spell power right now is 2. As you increase that with better gear, by getting raw spell damage, your Ice Lance's damage will do a lot more damage. Next we have Brain Freeze. Your frost spells with chilling effects will give you a 15% chance, if at rank 3, to be able to cast Frostfire Bolt or Fireball for instantly for no mana. This is a huge DPS boost. I highly recommend it. Frost Bomb. This places a Frost Bomb on the target after 1.5 seconds of casting and deals 100 frost damage over 6 seconds. Finally, when the effect ends or it gets dispelled, the bomb detonates for another 100 frost damage to all enemies within 10 yards and slows them by 50% for 2 seconds. This effect can be improved with your Permafrost, and it can also trigger Frostbite. I highly recommend getting that. Cone of Sleet is the advanced version of Cone of Cold. This causes your Cone of Cold to reduce the cast time of your next Frostbolt spell by 25%. I think at a higher rank, it's your next 2 Frostbolt spells, giving you 2 stacks instead of 1. Chill to the Bone is a really important talent here, because it increases the damage caused by your Frostbolt, Frostfire Bolt, and Ice Lance spells by up to 15%, and will increase the spell power bonus, the contribution from your spell damage, basically, to them by up to 40% of your spell power, and reduces the movement speed of all chilled targets by an additional 10%, making them even slower when they're hit by a frost spell. Winter's Chill will reduce the cast time of your Frostbolt by 0.3 seconds and give you an increased critical strike chance for your Frostbolt by 5. It also allows your frost spells to build up Winter's Chill stacks, which allows you to have a 1% additional critical strike chance per stack up to 5 when you hit the target with it. And so with 2 stacks of that, when you cast your now fast Frostbolt, the enemy gets Winter's Chill. And as it gets more and more chilly, you get more and more critical strike chance, making your critical strikes a lot more predictable. Finally, you have Deep Freeze. This does exactly what it used to do in Wrath of Lich King. It will stun the target for 5 seconds, and it's only used one frozen target. If you're not against a frozen target, like a boss, then you can just straight up do a bunch of damage to them. And so how this works is that you put a bunch of points in your frost spells. You can make it cheaper when they crit. They give back a bunch of mana. That's real useful. You put a bunch of I like putting a bunch of points back into frost. You don't need a whole bunch of points in anything else, really, in my opinion. Unless you want a Frostfire spec, then there's some obvious spells to get. But otherwise, this is kind of why I like to go. Maybe some points in the Permafrost here for the extra chill effects. Because when you stack it with this, you can control your enemies a lot better. It's like 20% more slows. That's more of a PvP type thing. And so the rotation for this is this is more like Ice Lance, Frostbolt, Frost Bomb for AoE, and Frost Firebolt. In my opinion, Frost Firebolt's a little bit better than Fireball because it doubles dips into all the frost stuff that you just put points into, rather than just Fireball, which doesn't feel organic to the spec. What I like to do is I like to build up stacks of Hail and only use my Ice Lance when I get the Frozen effect to increase the damage of the Ice Lance by 3 times. And so regardless of how many stacks of Hail I get, if I get the Fingers of Frost effect, then I'm going to throw them out regardless. Also a Brain Freeze. Boom. Oh yeah. That's real good. And now I get the extra 50% damage. Or 50% spell damage, which is like 12 damage here. Ice Lance when I do throw it out. So my DPS here is still pretty strong. Just like the other specs is about 100. If anything, that's probably a little too strong, but here it goes. Boom. That's a huge amount of burst right there. And so Frost has always been kind of like that. You have a lot more control over the fight, and when you do crit, you control when you crit. And when you do crit, it's huge. That said, you have to actually set it up, and you have to be thinking about how you're doing it. And so, being a Frost Mage is a little more intelligent, kind of, than, say, Fire or Arcane, which I actually find a bit more fun, to be honest. But, you know, a Frost Mage is cold and calculated, right? And as you can see here, you're a lot more mana efficient, too. Do note I am using Molten Armor instead of Mage Armor right now. So, I can actually be regenerating a bit more mana. That said, I think the damage is pretty good. You have these massive spikes of burst here, which may or may not be actually properly displayed on Skada, but, you know, what are you going to do? The damage is about like 100 DPS or so. But when you get those spikes, it's just absurd. I might come back and nerf it or buff it. Who knows? Frost was the one I had a lot less experimentation with and damage testing. But I probably played Frost more than the other two, to be honest, personally. Anyway, I hope that was a decent showcase of the Mage on Vilebranch. If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave a like, subscribe, comment in the YouTube comment section, or better yet, hop on my Discord linked in the description, go to the server, try it out yourself, and say, hey, Crow, I do or do not like this thing. And then I'll look at it even more and go, hey, maybe it's dog shit and needs to be changed. Or maybe it's great and fuck you. Or maybe you could tell me it's not great and fuck me. I don't care. I'm here for the feedback. Because this server's not for me. I mean, in a way it kind of is, but it's more for you guys. It's my vision of what I would want to play if I was a player. But I'm not the player. I don't know. Anyway. I think that's all for today. See you later. See ya. See you later. See ya. Bye-bye. Bye now. See ya.